Okay, guys, girls. First of all, glad everyone made it. Missing a couple players. A couple are not feeling great, but looks like the whole girls team's here. We're missing 3 of our guys team. This is Jim Potvin. He's going to be speaking to you tonight. So this is our U15 National South County Bandits team. They're a top 10 ranked team in the province. This is our U16 LaSalle Sabres. They're currently a top 3 team in the province.
We're second.
Are we 2? Okay, there you go. I'll take it. So both teams are looking to win a provincial championship, and we're looking to get more of the season than just volleyball and hockey. We're looking to make them better people and learn a little bit about themselves. And probably a lot of you, it's their first time coming to the university in this way, like not just coming to play volleyball or basketball in the St. Denis Center, but hope you get something out of it. And I'll leave it to you.
So do I.
Yeah, I'll leave it to you to take away. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, yeah. Okay, good evening, everyone. Just one note about myself. I got a real pet peeve with crinkling bags when I lecture. So you're free to eat out of them, but if you got to open them now. So that you don't, everyone's going to be trying to open it slowly. There we go. Yeah. A bit of a psychopath about it. First of all, I want to thank Chad Sutherland. So Chad is the head of the High Performance Center here, and he'll be speaking with you later, but he works in this building and set everything up. Chad and I used to work together. I used to be a professor here. This part of the building didn't exist. It was a big, tin box basically. So what I want to do is, I'm going to show you a little bit of some of the research we do, because it has a lot to do with kind of how your muscles work and how we can optimize the training of our muscles, and also maybe some counterintuitive things about how we can actually get just as strong and just as much endurance by lifting light weights repetitively as lifting heavy weights. So this comes in handy when people are recovering from injuries, but it's also a good thing to include in your training. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but when I started thinking about this, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was in your shoes when I was your age, and sports was all that mattered to me. And I'll tell you a little bit about kind of what happened to me from an injury point of view. But I also want to talk about, so I've been a professor for about 30 years, and I have a consulting company for about 25 years. And I've hired a lot of students, so a lot of my undergrad students, a lot of my grad students. And I was always a professor in kinesiology, so I had the advantage of hiring people that were typically had been athletes. And there were some things I learned about those people that I want to talk to you about, because I think they're important things to think about as a young athlete, but also to plan for, and also what you want to try to get out of sports. Because it's not going to last forever. Even LeBron's about to retire, and he's going to have 40 years of his life left after that. So it's important to start thinking about what you can get out of sports and what sports can do for you. Because what I mainly want to talk about is some of the qualities I saw in the people I hired, both males and females equally, and they just were so set apart from the other people in their work environments because they had been athletes. So I want to kind of synthesize what the things are that I saw in them and what their co-workers saw in them, and many of them have gone to become very, very successful, not in kinesiology, but as vice presidents of Stellantis, Lear Corporation, very successful in very large corporations, doing something completely different than what they trained for. So there's a few themes that I kind of want you to get out of this. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. All I cared about was sports when I was your age. I thought I was going to play sports forever. I played on the Ontario lacrosse team at the Canada Games in 1981, so you can do the math how long ago that was. Shortly after that, I played football at Assumption. I was a quarterback at Assumption for 3 years. And that's all I cared about was lacrosse and football. But I tore my knee in grade 12, or grade 13, I guess we used to have grade 13. And we had the best team in the city. You know, I thought we were going to win a championship. It's all I ever dreamed of doing, and all of that was taken away from me. And I learned a lot about myself in terms of how many people here are injured right now, like have injuries where you can't play. Okay, that's great. And you know, you don't tend to get sort of semi-permanent injuries at your age. You're also flexible and you recover so quickly. And one of the things I want to talk about in the science part of this is how important recovery is and how much quicker you recover when you're younger than when you're older. So anyways, it was the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. And one of the messages I want to get across to you is sometimes it's the things that seem like the worst things, like let's say you lose a game or somebody breaks up with you. In my experience, quite often I look back 5 years later and it turns out that was the best thing that ever happened to me. And no one could have convinced me 4 years ago that tearing my ACL was maybe going to end up actually being better for me than if it didn't happen. But I started to go more into academics and I started to focus more on other aspects of my life, and it ended up being a really positive thing. And if you said to me right now, I was thinking about this on the way here, if you could go back and not tear your ACL and win that championship, would you do it? And I probably wouldn't, because I don't know what I would have turned into if that hadn't happened to me, in terms of the things I learned about myself, and also the things that are really important, like school, that I focused a lot more on. And so I recovered from that injury. I had surgery on it, and I thought, well, okay, I want to play football again because I'm an idiot, and you know, this will never happen to me again. So I played quarterback for the AKO Fratman for a year when I was in first year university, or right after the summer after first year university. I was a backup quarterback, but I was on all the special teams, and on the same field, Windsor Stadium, the exact same place, not being hit, just cutting, I tore my other knee. And you know, I think that was God's way of saying, maybe you shouldn't play football, maybe you should focus on some other things. And the one thing is, you guys play sports that you're gonna be able to play your whole lives. Volleyball, hockey. I know people that are still 80 that play those sports. And I played a sport that, in retrospect, football, even if I was really good, and I had started for 5 years at the University of Windsor at quarterback, I would have never put on a uniform and played football again in my life. But the last time I did put a uniform on, I played for the AKO Frat. We had to win a game against Hamilton to get to the playoffs, and we had a kicker, Jerry Korak. You probably never heard of him, but Jerry won a Grey Cup, kicked the winning field goal, 45-yard field goal for the Edmonton Eskimos as a kicker, and I think is the last player in the NFL to be both the starting punter and field goal kicker. He was with the Cleveland Browns. And I used to hold for him because the backup quarterbacks always hold for the kickers. And so I tear my ACL, and I'm super depressed on the bench. And Jerry's got to go out and kick the winning field goal to put us in the playoffs. It's been a long time since we've been in the playoffs. So I'm sitting on the bench, I'm all feeling sorry for myself, and Jerry won't go out without me because kickers are crazy and they need the guy that holds for them. I'm like, I literally can't walk. So 2 linemen carried me on the field. I sat down and looked backwards. They snapped me the ball. I put the ball down. Jerry kicked I didn't do anything really. I just put it on the ground. And I got carried off the field because I couldn't walk off the field, and we won the game with a last-second field goal. So at least my last experience playing football was being carried off the field. It wasn't for the reasons I would have dreamt of. But ultimately, I think both of those injuries ended up being a really positive thing for me because I began to focus a lot more on academics. I got into biomechanics and ergonomics. If you don't know what biomechanics is, it's sort of the study of human movement and the forces and the torques that we create to jump and land. In fact, Chad's doing his PhD with me part-time through McMaster, where I was. And one of Chad used to be an assistant coach on the volleyball team here, the women's team. And one of the things he's really interested in is the effect of fatigue on the risk of getting injured, because a lot of, especially female volleyball players, when they get fatigued, they stop landing in the way that you would normally land. So they don't land where they absorb the shock because their quads are burning, and they come down and they just land on straight legs and they blow their ACL up. and it happens later in matches, and it happens a lot to females. Females tend to have slightly wider hips, so whereas the forces would go straight through the legs of the males, they kind of come through on a weird angle on the females, and it'll blow the ACL out. So I love sports biomechanics. That's what I wanted to do. And one of the lessons, again, I learned in life is you don't always get what you want, but sometimes what you get is better than what you dreamt of and what you thought you wanted to do. So when I graduated here, a guy, Wayne Marino, who retired recently from here, he was my mentor, and I said, I want to do sports biomechanics. This was mid-'80s. And he said, really, the only place anybody's doing sports biomechanics is in East Germany and Russia. That was back during the Cold War, during the communist regime. He says, I don't think you want to go to school there. He said, but if you go to Waterloo, they study work biomechanics, occupational biomechanics, and they're the best place to learn biomechanics. So I thought, okay, I'll go there. And I kind of fell in love looking at spine biomechanics, and I kind of got further and further away from sport. And I got a job at the University of Guelph, and I shared a lab with a guy named Mario LaFortune, and Mario was doing a lot of contract work for Nike. So Nike would get sued by Reebok because of patent infringement, and he'd do all these tests on the shoes to show that they were actually better than the Reebok shoes. And Mario got hired at Nike as the head of research in Beaverton, Oregon, my dream job. And about 4 months later, I had applied for a job here, and this was home for me, and I was excited to come here, and I do a lot of work with companies trying to reduce injuries in the workplace. So Ford, GM, and Chrysler, they were all here. And he asked me if I wanted to be the head of basketball research at Nike. And I thought to myself, you never would have taken the path I took if that's what you wanted. You know, I went in, started studying the spine, started looking at work, trying to get good at ergonomics, and yet somehow life brought me this opportunity. And that was right when they built the Michael Jordan Center, and he was in the building all the time. I would have been testing on him and all the pro athletes. And unfortunately, Phil Knight, who was the CEO of Nike, decided that all the heads of all their departments were men, and that they needed to find a female. So I was like, okay, and this job came open, and this was a perfect opportunity for me to come here and started to do a lot of work. They never did find a female, and they came back to me later, but I moved here and I started the job here, so I didn't go. I visited them at Nike. Some of my students ended up going there, and I kind of regretted maybe that I hadn't gone there, but things worked out pretty well. So I'm now getting further and further away from sports. But while I was at the University of Guelph, I played lacrosse my whole life, and I ended up somehow becoming the head coach of the men's lacrosse team at the University of Guelph. I did that for 2 years. Actually, we won the championship the second year, and then I coached the women's team for a year, and then I moved back to Windsor for the Windsor job. And Windsor's like the only city in Ontario that doesn't have a field lacrosse team, so I got out of coaching. But then what I did was I started doing a lot of ergonomics work, and I started working with Ford. And Ford will, for example, design a new vehicle, let's say the new F-150, the 2027 F-150. And at some point, they'll stop making the old vehicle and they'll start making the new one. And they have to transition on the assembly line to that. And they needed students of mine to go live in Norfolk, Virginia, Chicago, Cleveland, and work with the engineering teams to make sure that all the things that they've done in the designs ended up coming to fruition in the plan. And this is where I really had to pick good people, because they had to work in teams, they had to work with engineers, and they weren't trained with engineers. And a lot of times engineers look down their nose at kinesiology students because they think we're all going to be gym teachers. And they had to resolve conflicts. And what I found was they just kind of glowed in the dark in these work environments because of their background in sport. So I'll talk a little bit at the end about what some of the lessons were that I learned, and in terms of the kinds of people that I looked for. And after 9 years here, I ended up moving to McMaster University, and because McMaster had a PhD program, and I never got to supervise PhD students, and I wanted to do that in my career. So I went to Mac for 9 years, and I just thought, well, those students are going to be the exact same as the ones that I had at Windsor. And they weren't at all. they had never played sports, most of them. They had never had a part-time job. They had no social skills. And I could barely find 1 or 2 a year to hire, because sometimes I had 8 or 9 people working for me. Luckily, I still had a bunch of students back in Windsor that I was going to hire. And I thought to myself, what was it about those Windsor students? They didn't have the highest averages coming out of high school, and so they couldn't get into McMaster. I mean, the cutoff at McMaster, if you're starting to, maybe the guys who are a little bit older are starting to think about, university and what grades you need for university. To get into McMaster, you needed like an 89% average in your top 6 courses in high school. But they were all nerds, and they had no social skills. They could not handle criticism. They couldn't take no for an answer, and I didn't find that with athletes. Because even if you're the best hockey player in your age group or the best volleyball player, the chances are at some point you'll go up and play with people older than you. And you're not going to be nearly as good as they are. Maybe you haven't grown as much or you aren't as strong. And you're going to be in a position where you're humbled. Even though you're very talented, you're humbled because now you're starting from the bottom and you're working your way up. It's the same with any rookie that comes into the NFL or the NBA. They go from being the Heisman Trophy winner to the first round pick to being a third string quarterback or worse, getting cut. And so what I found was the people that I dealt with that were athletes, they learned how to handle those things. And these super bright people that I had at McMaster, they weren't the same. Now there was the odd one that played football or hockey, or at least had played a lot of sports in high school. But there weren't nearly as many. And so ultimately I stopped doing it because I couldn't find good people. And I really missed the people from Windsor. And everyone kind of thinks Windsor's last chance U, but I would hire 15 people a year from Windsor. And I could find 1 or 2 at McMaster. And if you looked at their transcripts, you wouldn't think that was the case. So I think as people that are athletes, you have to start to think about kind of the long game here. And it's not just about what you're going to accomplish right now. It's how can you use the skills as an athlete and the experiences and the embarrassments and humiliations and failed championships, failed attempts, and how you can channel that to something that's actually going to be very important for you later. Because, I don't want to break it to you, but your athletic careers are going to be a very small part of your life. I mean, the very competitive part. And it's really important that you give it everything you have, and you can make it the most important thing. I'm not telling you not to make it the most important thing, but someday you might be parents, or you might lose someone, or your kids are going to be in sports, and your kids, you probably know this from your own parents, your performance as children to your parents is more important to them than probably sports were to them when they played them. So you're going to have a lot of things in your life that are going to be more important to this someday, and you need to have a perspective on that. And the important thing is to have a perspective when you fail, that it's not the end of the world, that it's actually maybe going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. And I can't tell you how many times, Chad and I have talked about this, how many times students have come in my office and said, we lost the golf championship, or my girlfriend broke up with me, or I didn't get that job I just applied for. And I'm like, let's talk in 5 years. And in 5 years we talk, and they're like, that's the best thing. I shouldn't have been with that person, or I learned a lot by losing, or I didn't get that job, and then the perfect job for me came up right after. So just try to keep some sort of perspective as you give everything you have to this, and you can make it the most important thing in your life right now. But in my experience, the people that are successful later are the ones who are able to kind of channel those negative experiences and turn them into something that's positive. So I think that's mostly what I wanted to say. I want to show you a little bit about what we do in research and teach you a little bit about how your muscles work. I'm trying to think if there's any points that the other thing I think when I say play the long game is the one thing that I found, because I had teams of people that worked in my lab. I'd have 10 or 15 people working in my lab, and I would observe, like I would a team that I was coaching, how they interacted with each other. And I think it's really important to always remember, while there's a hierarchy on a team that you're on, maybe someone is clearly the best player, and maybe someone is clearly the worst player, that is one of a million hierarchies you're going to be in. And just because this person is the worst player on your team right now, maybe they haven't had their growth spurt, maybe they're a little bit young for their age group, or maybe they just weren't born to be a superstar in this particular sport, they may end up being a CEO someday. They may end up being your boss someday. And try to keep some perspective on, you know, a person's worth is not completely tied up in how good they are at that sport you happen to be playing that day or that year or that week. There's a lot of elements to it. And those people later might end up being the most successful people that you know. You might even brag about knowing them someday in a different avenue or a different venture. So just keep all of that in mind and just try to take everything you can out of sports, independent of the fitness you get from it and the exhilaration you get from winning or scoring. Try to keep in mind that this is a part of a bigger aspect of your life, and you are going to live 4 or 5 times longer as a non-elite athlete as you are going to be in this period of time right now. And the people that I've found to be really successful, who, mind you, are about 4 or 5 years older than you are right now, but you're not that far away from being in that boat, they're the people that channeled all these things and turned it into something positive. So what I'm going to do is just show you a little bit about what I do and try to make it relevant for you. It's going to get a little technical, but I'm going to try to simplify it as much as I can. But I think one of the things I find, and I used to joke about this because I would be teaching biomechanics, and the Canadian record holder in rushing yards would come up to me and say, I don't really understand biomechanics. I go, well, nobody's better at biomechanics than you. You're the best athlete that I've ever seen. You clearly intuitively know what to do. You maybe don't know the math behind it, but you understand, why you're doing what you're doing and how to do it, and you've learned to do it in an optimal way. So usually my job is to try to put it in a context that people can kind of understand. So I'm going to use an analogy to try to explain to you how muscles work, because nothing could be more foundational to athletics than how your muscles work. And give you sort of a counterintuitive thing that you should take with you, not necessarily now. You can lift heavy loads now, but as you get Todd's age or my age, it becomes important to kind of protect your body. Well, you don't even need to be our age. You could be 30 and you'll find that you can't lift the heavy loads without having to take long breaks in between. So let's just talk a little bit about how muscles work and how they fatigue and how they recover. And we'll just hopefully have a few lessons here that you can take with you in your own training. Are these guys on like weight programs? And
Some are. I mean, independently, not directly through our team, but some are training.
Yeah. And Chad will talk more about this when he speaks to you. Okay, so let's take a look at a muscle. This is going to be this will give you a little flavor of what a university lecture is like. It'll be just as boring as all of those university lectures that you're going to do. But I'm going to keep this short and sweet. So basically muscles are made up of a bunch of fibers. Now, I did a talk once for a bunch of grade school kids. And I was saying, hey, do you guys know what a muscle is? And people put their hand up, and I said, when you get a steak, that's muscle. And all the kids and the teacher's basically I was creating a whole room of vegetarians, I think, as they began to realize that muscles were really the meat that they ate. But if you look at a muscle, or even if you look at a steak, it's made up of a bunch of little fibers. And you guys probably hear the term fast twitch, slow twitch. You might hear athletes, they're twitchy. They're fast twitch athlete. Yeah, see, I can see you're a fast twitch athlete too. So there is a certain benefit from having a large percentage of your muscle be fast twitch, because it means you can generate a lot of power quickly. So sprinters are fast twitch athletes. They're not made up all of fast twitch motor units, but they have a higher percentage of them. And people that have more slow twitch motor units, they maybe become more like marathon runners, where they can generate low forces for long periods of time. But every muscle has some combination of fibers, and it's not like we either have fast twitch fibers or slow twitch, they're on sort of a continuum. But it's important to kind of understand the properties of each of these to understand why muscles fatigue like they do when you do things very quickly. So for example, in hockey, you'll have a very short, let's say, shift, 30 seconds, 40 seconds. And one of the things Chad and I talk about with his research is we're not really interested in trying to train people so they never fatigue. Any hockey player knows that if you're not exhausted at the end of the shift, you just weren't trying hard enough. And so you should be exhausted. The problem is if things start to fall apart technique-wise because you're fatigued, then you can get injured. Or if you're someone who can't recover very quickly and aren't ready 2 shifts later to go back out, well then your performance is going to degrade. And it's the same thing kind of more over a longer period with multiple sets in volleyball. Now, there are going to be periods of time where you're exhausted and you need to recover quickly, but it's a little bit more episodic volleyball than kind of the continuous play, except for breaks for whistles in hockey. So anyways, we have these bundles of fibers. They're innervated by a nerve. And so you might have a motor unit that's got one nerve to it, that's a whole bundle of slow twitch fibers, and the biggest motor unit might have a bigger bundle of very powerful fibers, and they would be innervated with one nerve. And so this works on what's called the size principle. So the bigger neurons, they have more resistance, so it takes a lot more current or flow from the brain to get them to start firing. The smaller motor units, they will start to fire sooner. And so when you try to, let's say I'm just going to apply a small amount of force with my finger, then I can just turn some juice down to the muscle, and you don't even have to worry about telling which of these to turn on. The only one that's going to reach its threshold will be this one. It'll start to fire 8 or 10 times a second. It doesn't produce a lot of force. This is a twitch. This is a better idea of what a twitch is. This is how much force comes out of the motor unit every time it fires. And they sort of add up to produce force. So these produce a huge amount of force, and these produce a low amount of force. And as you turn the juice up to this one will start to fire, and then this one will start to fire. And the beauty of this is that these ones can go forever almost, and these ones you only want to turn them on when you really need them. So let's say for a brief jump, you have a question?
Yeah, I got a question. What does that mean? Like, does it mean that like when you're running or something, or like when you're playing a sport, right? And you do quick movement, that's like what it means?
Yeah, so for example, if like in volleyball, if you're gonna go up for a kill, you're gonna generate as much power as you can to lift yourself off the ground. You're gonna turn the juice up to the muscle to 100%. And so that means all of these are gonna turn on, because this one's gonna get enough juice to have it reach its threshold and start to fire.
I was just curious, like what movement, like I was curious.
Like a maximum, like a sprint, or even if you did like a maximum hold, anything close to 100% is going to start to recruit these motor units.
Okay, thank you.
And the problem with those motor units is they fatigue very fast. They fatigue almost instantaneously. So you can't use them all the time, or otherwise we could sprint for 10 minutes. But you look at if you ever watched any races with Usain Bolt, or even the world record holder, or the fastest person in the world right now, when you watch them in a race, it looks like they're accelerating through the whole race because people are falling behind. They're just slowing down at a lower rate than the other people. You cannot, this is why at the combine in the NFL, they do 40 meter sprints, because the longest distance that you could run at maximum speed is about 4 seconds. And then these start to fatigue, and because they're the strongest ones, you start to lose a lot of strength. And so if you watch the velocity of a 100 meter Olympic championship, the speed just goes down continuously after 4 seconds. It's just some people it's going down at a greater rate than other people.
I have another question. Is there any way you could like augment like your amount of like seconds you could like run? Like at full pace, I mean, like at full speed.
So you can't really, you probably can't change how long you can, like you can't go from 4 seconds to 5 seconds at 100%, but you can get more out of that 4 seconds. So one of the tests that we do, and it's a perfect one for hockey players, is it's called the Wingate. Has anybody ever heard of a Wingate test? So when they do combines for the NHL, and lots of sports, but hockey's perfect, is they get you on an exercise bike, like a Peloton type of thing, and they could drop a load on it that'll be the resistance. And they will drop that load, and they'll have you hold it for, go as hard as you can for 30 seconds, and they'll measure the amount of power that you can generate for 30 seconds. And what you see is the power goes down steadily over that 30 seconds. But some people start here and go down, and other people don't have as much power. So they look at the total amount of work that you can do or power you can generate throughout that. And if you do it right, we used to do these in our labs, if you do it right, you should throw up at the end. I mean, if you're really going 100%, you should throw up at the end. And that is one of the best measures of what we call anaerobic capacity of an athlete. Anybody know what anaerobic is versus aerobic? Anyone know what the term aerobic means? Any guesses? There used to be a thing called aerobics back when I was in the 80s. It was like the big fitness craze. So aerobic means something you do for longer periods of time. And so if you go for a marathon run, you can't just use the energy stored in your muscles because you use that up so it's glycogen. You need to use the energy provided through oxygen. And so that your bloodstream is constantly bringing energy, and it's aerobic because you're using air. Anaerobic means it can happen, basically you could hold your breath for 4 seconds and sprint. You wouldn't need oxygen because you're using all of the energy that's stored in your muscles, your liver. These are things that are right there for the muscle to use. But they run out pretty quickly. So you can't do these things for long periods of time. And so one of the worst things that a marathon runner could do is come out and sprint for 40 seconds, 50 seconds at the beginning of a race. Because when you use all of that energy in the muscles, it actually produces acid called, what's it called? Lactic acid. It produces lactic acid, and then that lactic acid fills up the muscle, and it's so painful you can't really perform, and it takes forever for you to get it out. So these guys need to kind of stay just under that threshold where they're not using the energy in the muscles and they're using as much. So you can generate more power during that 4 seconds, but you can't really drag 4 to 5 to 6. Even the world record holder, Usain Bolt, could only run at maximum speed for 4 seconds, no matter how much training he did. So I just want to show you let's just do an analogy here. So this is a picture from an old Navy ad, but it's the perfect picture for what I'm trying to do. So we're going to use a tug of war as an analogy for how your muscles work. And this is, your athletes, it's important to know how your muscles work, but it's going to be also important to understand this as you train. Because you're probably going to get more and more into resistance training, plyometrics, and it's important to know how to use these to enhance your performance. Because you're doing it mostly with God-given gifts right now, but the people that are going to differentiate themselves in a year, 2 years, 3 years, if some of you go to the OHL, some of you go to Europe to play or play at the university, they're the ones that are going to work hardest at resistance training and other forms of training. You're right at the cusp of where you can't just get by on what God gave you. You're going to have to supplement that with training. And now you're practicing, and that's a form of training, but you need to go above and beyond that. And you need to optimize how you recover, and you're going to have to optimize the nutrition that you feed your body so that you can train and recover. And you're going to have to optimize the sleep that you get. These are all things that are very important. One of my students, again, talking about people that he was into ergonomics, he loved baseball on the side, he would do some stuff with the fatigue model that I'll tell you about, and now he's a sports scientist for the Cubs. He's actually at the game right now in Chicago. And he says that basically most teams will share how they train, but they will not share how they recover. That is the secret sauce. The one unknown frontier right now is how can athletes and teams optimize the amount of recovery that athletes get. And I can tell you right now, and I'm sure Todd can verify this, it's as you get older, so I'm 62, if I went out and played hockey right now, you wouldn't notice a huge difference with how I played hockey when I was in my 20s. I'd probably be a little bit slower, but my performance wouldn't be that different. The big difference is I can't play hockey every day because I can't recover fast enough to play the next day. This is why you see athletes, for example, pitchers, Odell Beckham Jr. I think just got caught for performance-enhancing drugs. A lot of these guys take human growth hormone, not so that they can become stronger, just so they can recover. Because they don't think it's fair that they can't practice every day like they did. They don't think it's cheating. Roger Clemens, one of the greatest pitchers ever, started using human growth hormone just so he could pitch every 5 days. Not so he could throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball again. He just wanted to be able to perform every day because he couldn't recover like he used to. And your performance obviously starts to go down if you can't train at the rate that you want to. So let's just go through one example here. So let's say we got 3 guys. Let's say this guy's kind of a master's long distance runner. This guy's still doing powerlifting, and this guy's a bit of a cross trainer. So how would they work together to generate force? This is essentially what muscles do. So let's imagine most muscles have 120 to 2,000 motor units in them, but let's just pretend we have a muscle that only has 3 motor units. So what happens is, if you ask this thing to generate, let's say, a small amount of force, 1%, what people imagine is the whole muscle pulls at 1%, but that's not what it does. Basically, the other 2 sit on the bench, and the smallest one starts to pull at like 10% of their maximum strength, but they're really weak. So the total strength that it gives the whole muscle is 1%. The good thing is this thing can fire over and over, producing a little bit of force, and it can maintain a 1% effort. And so, you know, I could push on this at 1% effort for probably 6 hours before I start to fatigue. So now we're going to turn this up a little bit, and we're now going to tell the muscle that the other team is pulling with 10% of their total strength. Now that's the total strength of all 3 of them combined. Now what's going to happen is this guy's going to fire about 30 times a second, and this one will fire about 25 times a second. Now this is an intermediate athlete, or an intermediate motor unit, so it's going to fatigue faster than that first one does. Not immediately, but it's going to fatigue faster. And so you only have a certain amount of time at 10% that you can get by with these 2. And at some point, they're going to lose so much strength that you're going to have to bring the last one in. And when we get to 100% here, now this one's firing rate's gone up because you keep turning the juice up to the whole muscle. This one's firing rate goes up, and this one now is on. Problem is, this guy's going to fatigue almost instantaneously. So he's good for a big burst, and then he's got to sit down. And so at this point, let's say the muscle was then, the other team started pulling with less force, and this muscle could go back down to 10% of effort. This guy sits down. He actually gets to recover. So it's not like the whole muscle is going up and the whole muscle is going down. Different parts of it are contributing, like I'm showing in this tug of war. And so luckily this guy gets to recover because he's exhausted. He's only been on for like 3 or 4 seconds, and he's pretty much exhausted. And now you're back to using these guys, but because the muscle's fatigued, they probably even have to be on at a higher effort. And then if we go down to 1% again, these 2 sit down, they don't do anything, and this one is still on. So in ergonomics, we call this the Cinderella fibers. Because as the story goes, Cinderella was the first one up in the morning, and she was the last one to go to bed. So she was working all day. And so when we look at work in ergonomics and try to figure out which workers are going to get injured, it turns out like if your elbow rest is a little bit too low or a little bit too high, and you have to shrug your shoulders at a very imperceptible amount, 1 or 2%, that over days and days, that's going to ruin that muscle. And it's mostly going to be this motor unit that's on the whole time because these 2 aren't contributing. Because if they came on, they could only last for a couple seconds anyways. And so what ends up being important is this is not how we go from 10 to 50 to 100%. It's not like everybody pulls at 10%, everybody then pulls at 50, and everybody pulls at 100. The fact is that that guy's on, and then at 50, these ones are on in some sort of synchrony, and then when you get to 100%, these are all on. And that has huge implications for how our muscles fatigue and how our muscles recover. And we use this model as well. I've done work for Apple. When Apple was designing the new iPhone, well, the iPhone 12, and they got rid of the home button. You guys maybe don't even remember a home button, but it used to have a physical button on it. And they wanted to figure out what finger gesture should replace the button. So now you do a thumb swipe. So they wanted to do studies on that. So they used this fatigue model of mine to try to figure out, because that's a fairly low effort, but you do it hundreds of times a day. And they wanted to figure out what was the best gesture for the most number of different hand sizes to replace the home button. I've done stuff with Amazon using this in some of their warehousing. So this is a good way for us to determine really how the muscle is fatiguing, but it's not like the whole muscle fatigues equally. Parts of the muscle could be resting while other parts are fatiguing all day. And so I won't go through too much more. I think I've kind of talked. We have a paper where we can look at individual motor units and how they fatigue and recover. And one of the things that we did, and I'll just go to the end here, we were able to validate some work that was really controversial. So I had a colleague at McMaster, Stu Phillips, who's probably one of the foremost experts in the world on resistance training and on protein intake and protein synthesis. This is another thing probably you're going to start to think about is, how much protein do I need to get into my body to help build muscles? Stu's big thing is, if you want to lay a brick wall, you need to have the bricks available. And if you're going to build muscle, then the amino acids and the protein need to be in your body. So you need to ingest enough protein that your body has something to build the muscle with. So if you're going to the gym and you're pumping iron and you're not ingesting protein, you're just wasting time, because it's got nothing to build. So one of the things that we use my model for, and this kind of idea of how different motor units, is they started doing studies where they had people not lift. So, a typical weightlifting regime would be, you figure out what's the most you could bench press, let's say. And then you take 80% of that, and you should be able to do about 8 reps. And you do a set, and you recover, and then you do another set, you recover, and you do another set. And that's how you build muscle. That's the traditional way that people build muscle. What they did was they did a study where for 6 weeks, and some of my students were subjects, Chad and I know the people that were in the study, they never got to lift the load more than 30% of the maximum. Well, you'd think, well, you can't gain strength lifting 30% of your maximum. You have to lift heavy loads to do that. And what my model shows, and what their data show, is that if you do 30% of maximum to exhaustion, and what it turns out is, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as it's over about 20%, as long as you go to exhaustion, your body is then triggered to repair itself. Now, for those of you that don't know how resistance training works, is you don't really get gains if you don't damage the muscle. That's why you're sore the next day. Now, you don't want to injure the muscle, but you have to have micro damage. There needs to be, like, if you look at the old Tarzan movies where the vine is starting to fray, you need to have some fraying of the fibers. And then what the body does is says, okay, if you give me 48 hours to recover, I'm not just going to bring the muscle back to where it was. I'm going to make it stronger in case this idiot goes back in the gym and tries to lift those loads again. I'm going to be ready for it. And this is why we call progressive resistance. You damage it. Let's say you're bench pressing 150 pounds, and you do your sets, and you damage it. You have the delayed onset muscle soreness the next day and into the next day. If you give it 48 hours to recover, the muscle will be a little bit stronger than it was the session before. So now you put 155 pounds on it because you want to damage it again. And the muscle is trying to stay ahead of you, and you're constantly challenging it with more damage. And so that's where we get progressive resistance. That's how people become much stronger. That's how they can squat 400 pounds. They didn't start there. They kind of kept building, damaging, recovery, damage, recovery, and it's what's called supercompensation. The muscle just keeps overcompensating, and if you just thread the needle perfectly, you're going to get strength gains. Now it turns out that damage can occur as long as you go to exhaustion. So you don't need to lift heavy loads. Now you're going to want to lift heavy loads. You're young, especially the guys, I'm sure. But you don't have to. And if you're injured, or if you have some swelling in a joint, you can still lift loads at 30% of maximum. It just might take 30, 35 reps before you get to exhaustion. And you're in pain for a lot longer. So it's actually harder to do the low effort because you're feeling the burn for like a minute and a half it takes to do 30 reps, whereas you can bang 8 reps out in, 15, 20 seconds. So just remember this. I think it's just important to have an idea as an athlete how your body works, as well as how to optimize its performance. So once you do get into resistance training, which shouldn't be that long from now, if you want to continue to improve, these are important things to remember. Or even if you want to mix it up, you can do some heavy loads some days, you can do some lighter loads other days. If you've got instability in a joint, or you're recovering from an injury, you've sprained an ankle, you can still work those muscles out without exposing the joint to really heavy loads. This is particularly beneficial for people with arthritis. No, you're not in that world, but people that have joint pain, people that are recovering from, let's say, an ACL surgery, where you can keep working the muscle without really putting a lot of load on the joint. Okay? So I think I'll finish there. I think just a couple things I wanted to get to you today is it's important to have, these are some themes that came out of kind of looking at my notes when I was putting this together. It's important to have a plan, but nothing ever goes to plan. And sometimes it's better when it doesn't go to plan. This is evolution. Basically the way evolution works is the species was a certain state, and then there was a complete mutation, a complete mistake. And it turned out maybe that mistake actually was more optimal. Maybe it was going to make the ears bigger so people could hear better. Or maybe it was going to somehow improve vision. So these are the things that lead to progress. So don't be devastated when things don't go to plan. You need to be resilient and you need to adjust to it. But also know that 90% of my experience of things that seem like the worst thing that ever happened to me actually were better for me than if it didn't happen at all. And that's important. It's hard to think of that as a young person, but that's the case. And the other thing, and this kind of goes to working to exhaustion, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what you lift, just go to exhaustion. And I can tell you right now that in my experience as an athlete, as a coach, and as someone who hires people, it's the people that work the hardest that are the most successful. It's not the people that were just born the most talented. In fact, that can be a disability for people. Because as young people, you're a superstar, everyone's congratulating you, and you start to believe your own press clippings, and you don't think you need to work. That's when you need to work. And the better you are, the harder you need to work, because people are coming for you. At your ages, people are growing faster than you, people might get taller than you. You need to work. And if you can combine working hard with other things that are important, like being a good teammate, being a good leader, respecting everyone, those are the successful people. And I'm not talking about in your sports in this coming year, I just mean in life. Those are the people that have the best lives, because they can always fall back on working hard. And I cannot stress that enough. When I got injured, I began to work a lot harder at school, and everything I have in life is because I worked harder at school. It wasn't because I had been a decent athlete. And again, you have to remember that take every win and loss as something that you're going to grow from, because your life after athletics is going to be a lot longer than the life you have in athletics. And someday it's going to be a distant memory, but there's going to be a lot of things that you can give you an edge over other people in life through the experiences that you have now. And again, train smart. You don't have to do everything at 100% in terms of 100% of your maximum strength, but give it all you have and go to exhaustion, and then you'll get benefits. And the last thing is, and this is gonna, I think we're gonna see more and more of this in high performance, recovery is the thing. You probably are never thinking about recovery right now. You can recover from everything the next day. But you need to start thinking about your nutrition. You need to start thinking about your sleep, because that's a huge advantage. For any of you that have watches that can track your sleep, I encourage you to start tracking your sleep. First thing I look at every morning, how much REM did I get? How much deep sleep did I get? I track at the end of the week, do I need to go to bed earlier? Because my mental performance goes down, my athletic performance goes down. And there are things you can do on your iWatch or whatever you have that can track sleep very accurately. And that is gonna give you a huge edge. But again, a lot of these things you don't have to worry about right now because you recover almost instantaneously at your age. But even at your age, it can give you an advantage. And this is the last little shout out, is kinesiology is not just for people who want to be physiotherapists or chiropractors or gym teachers. There's a lot of really interesting careers. We have a friend who's like the director of strategic planning. I don't know if these guys know Nadia or...
No.
Yeah, so I don't know how old her kids are, but...
Eric is a year older than the boys, and Elliot's a year younger than the girls.
So anyways, she started in ergonomics, and now she's like a director, almost a vice president at Ford Motor Company in a completely unrelated thing. And I could give you about 20, 30 stories of people like that. So if you're ever interested in kinesiology, you'll probably be even more interested once Chad shows you some of the high performance stuff. We're happy to talk to you, or Chad's happy to talk to you. So anyways, I'll finish it there. I want to thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yeah.
I saw a video before on TikTok. It was like, if you take longer rests in between sets, do you gain muscle? Like gain more muscle if you were just to like jump right back into it?
Yeah, so I mean, Chad's probably a better person to answer this, and maybe I'll leave it to him because he's quite an expert on resistance training. It's a great question because there's a bit of a debate about it, but what's the current state of things?
Sorry, what did the video say? It was, I think so they took people, half the people had 2-minute rest in between sets, and then the other people just like 20 or 10 seconds before they went to go to their next set.
So it depends. And so I'll say if you're training for power, and power is king in sports, that's all anyone cares about, then you need longer rest because you can't generate power if you have too short a rest.
But for more general training, again, you want to go to exhaustion, so you don't want to leave the gym rested, which if you have too long of a rest in between. But if you're purely trying to build power, like all you're doing is clean and jerks, or you're a high performance sprinter, then that might be the case. But
Yeah, so like an off season, I'm planning to have 6 weeks of like power muscle generation, where you would have like, you might lift 80% of 1 RM and you get like a 3-minute break, versus where you might lift, 80% and you have a shorter time period. So depending where you're at, but yeah, if you need to recover, so you need to at least have a couple minutes, and that's why those off season lifts are so long, because you are taking 2, 3, 4 minutes in between every single set, versus if you're taking like 60 to 90 seconds. Yeah. So it really depends what the objective is.
and so there's the recovery between sets, and then there's the recovery between days. So, again, you guys are young enough, you might be able to go to the gym and not feel sore. I mean, probably if you're not sore, you're not working hard enough. But you should always give 48 hours for a body part to recover so that you have some time for that super compensation to occur. And then you need to keep pushing the loads up each time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And, I probably don't need to tell you, but I feel it's a public service. Do not believe everything you hear on TikTok especially, but pretty much any social media. Don't even believe everything you hear in AI. So if you pump it into, I put stuff into ChatGPT, oh yeah, there's 10 articles on this, and it'll list the 10 articles, and I'll look up, and 8 of them don't exist. Like they've just never, I don't even know where they got the name. They have authors, they have a journal, they don't even exist. So you really got to be careful on where you get your information, or at least try to cross-reference it against other things, at the very least before you start to put it into practice. Okay, well, you guys have been very attentive. I think they're all going to be good university students. You're welcome. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, guys.